All right, we're going to call the meeting to order. My name is Pam Wheelock. I'm the chair of the Destination Medical Center Board, and I'd like to thank you for joining us here this morning, both in the room and virtually for those who are participating in that manner. And we're in 2 Discovery Square, and when we bring Patrick up, I'll ask him to tell us a little bit about this space, and we are excited to be here. It's just fabulous that within the last few years we were able to make such great progress here, and we're excited to have our meeting here in this space, and we know it will go seamlessly. So fingers crossed that everything works in a new space for us, and we're going to jump in and get going. And I'm going to ask Kayla, because we do have a member participating virtually, we're going to be doing roll calls today. So Kayla, would you start us off by calling the roll?
Certainly, Madam Chair. Member Baker.
Here.
Member Campbell.
Here.
Member Carlson.
Here, remote.
Vice Chair Norton.
Present.
Member Rybeck. Member Tyne.
Here.
Chair Wheelock.
Here.
Member Williams.
Here.
Everyone who has spoken is present, Madam Chair.
Thank you. All right, we'll move on to the approval of the agenda. Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved. Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Kayla, will you please call the roll?
Certainly, Member Baker.
Yes.
Member Campbell.
Aye.
Member Carlson.
Aye.
Vice Chair Norton.
Aye.
Member Rybeck. Member Tyne.
Aye.
Chair Wheelock.
Aye.
Member Williams.
Aye.
The motion carries.
Thank you, and we will move forward to the approval of the minutes. Is there a motion for the approval of the minutes?
Move approval.
Second?
Second.
Moved and seconded. Kayla, would you please call the roll?
Member Baker.
Aye.
Member Campbell.
Aye.
Member Carlson.
Aye.
Vice Chair Norton.
Aye.
Member Rybeck. Member Tyne.
Aye.
Chair Wheelock.
Aye.
Member Williams.
Aye.
The motion carries.
Thank you. Next on our agenda is the public comment period. So we're going to open this up for public comment. Anyone who wishes to offer comments can do so either in person or virtually via the Zoom link. And we would only ask that you keep your comments to under 2 minutes, and please state your name for the record. Does anyone wish to address the board? And is there anyone on the Zoom link? All right. Thank you. I'll close the public comment period and we'll move on to the chair's report. I'm actually going to be as brief as I can be because we have a fair amount of work on our agenda today, and so we'll reserve as much time for the discussion about our 2024 budget and priorities as possible. Just a few comments. First, on an administrative note, I'll share with you that I have appointed Deputy City Administrator Aaron Parrish as our interim assistant treasurer. We had discussed this at our June meeting, and we knew that we had Dale's retirement and we're in transition. So though Aaron is not able to join us today, I do want to thank him for stepping into this role. And we'll keep you posted as the city moves to fill those positions on a more permanent basis when we will then reconsider this appointment. Secondly, I'd like to thank the team here at 2 Discovery Square for hosting us today. We're excited to be in your space. It's really fantastic to have our meeting in this brand new space and to showcase this more publicly. So we thank you for all of your hard work to make this meeting happen, and we're excited to be here. And finally, I just want to thank everyone who attended the DMC annual meeting last week. Though I was traveling, I've heard good things about it already, and I think it's really important to acknowledge all of the hard work done by so many community partners to help advance the goals of the Destination Medical Center, and thanks to all of the staff that put so much effort into making that a successful event. So the weather hopefully will hold up every year for these events, and I look forward to being at next year's as well. So thank you for that. We'll move on to the consent agenda, and just a few things that are noted here. There's information in your packet. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved. Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Kayla, seeing no requests for moving items off the consent agenda, would you call the roll?
Certainly. Member Baker.
Aye.
Member Campbell.
Aye.
Member Carlson.
Aye.
Vice Chair Norton.
Aye.
Member Rybeck. Member Tyne.
Aye.
Chair Wheelock.
Aye.
Member Williams.
Aye.
Motion carries.
And Member Norton, did you have a comment or a question?
I did. I just had a question, and my apologies for not getting to this sooner, but I had a question about the last page, page 42 of what we just approved, and it's a question about the steam replacement, which was not spent this year. Is that carried over and encumbered for the next year, or do we start over? I just had a question about how that was being handled, and I didn't get a chance to ask ahead, and my apologies.
Patrick, do you have a answer for that?
Okay, on page 42 of the book, you have the steam replacement district energy, which was not, it's not going to be utilized this year, it doesn't sound like. And so I'm wondering, is that just encumbered into the next year?
Yes,
or
yes.
That's how that's handled? Okay, I just was looking for clarification. Thank you for that, I appreciate it.
All right, thank you. Moving on, we'll move to our report on our Form 990. I'm just checking to see, oh yes, there you are, right front and center. We have Craig Poppenhagen here again with us this year, talk a little bit about our tax return and our state charitable organization report. Craig, thank you for being here. I know that you were coming on the heels of another meeting, so you have a very busy morning. We appreciate that we're a priority for you, and we're going to turn it over to you to go through this information with us.
All right. Thank you very much. Over here quickly. So Chair Wheelock, fellow board members, it is a pleasure to be with you this morning. The Form 990, a draft of that is in the board packet, and I'll just go through and kind of hit the highlights here. So there's really been no changes or revisions to the Form 990 now for several years. So other than updating for current year numbers and things like that, the form looks very comparable to previous years. Part 3, in the packet, it's on page 51 of the board packet. We state the DMC's organizational purpose, which is basically its mission statement. Page 55 lists out the members of the board and governance policies and practices. So a good policy and practice with the Form 990 is that you as board members are able to see a draft of the Form 990 and review it prior to it being filed. That is important in the eyes of the IRS, so that's something that they look for. I'll just point out that board members are not compensated for their service on this board. And on page 58 of the board packet, there's no unrelated business income within DMCC, so everything is program and mission related. Schedule B, we list out contributors, and what that means is basically major funding sources or providers of funding, and that is the City of Rochester. That's on page 71 of the board packet. So kind of how the funding works is that all of the funding passes from the state through the City of Rochester to DMCC and then on to the EDA. That's how the relationship was established several years ago. Page 81, Schedule R for related organizations, that is DMC EDA, so that no change there. The filing deadline for IRS Form 990 is November 15th. With the Minnesota Charitable Organization annual report, this is an annual filing with the Attorney General's office. There's been no changes here in the tax exempt status for DMCC, no changes in organizational purpose or programs, no changes in the DMCC's ability to solicit contributions. So when DMCC was created, It was submitted to the Attorney General's office as a soliciting organization. Thus far, DMCC has not solicited contributions. It's all been grant funded and program funded. Nevertheless, that ability is present if the DMCC ever chose to do so. You are prepared for that. So, and then no compensation paid in excess of $100,000, basically no compensation, period. So as with the Form 990, the deadline for filing is November 15th. The last thing that we have is basically the Minnesota Nonprofit Corporation annual renewal. This is an online filing with the Minnesota Secretary of State. So out of this whole packet, that is the one thing we as Clifton Larson Allen, your tax preparer, are not able to do. That is something that DMCC will have to do. We do check each year, and DMCC is in good status through December 31, 2023, and then the annual renewal to be filed online for 2024. And those are my prepared remarks. Chair Wheelock, I'll pass this back to you.
Thank you very much. I know it makes it a little easier when nothing has essentially changed from our last review of this, but are there any questions by any of the members of the board or comments?
Madam Chair, just a structural question. Does the EDA have a separate, do they also do a separate audit, or are they part of Mayo and their audit process?
Pat?
They are not. I can answer that question. Yep. So yes, EDA is separately audited, and they file their own IRS Form 990, as well as the charitable organization
That's
reports.
Great. Yeah. Thank you.
Any further questions? Member Norton.
Yeah, just clarification on the total amount from the city contributions. That is pass-through money from the state as well as the city's contribution, both in the one line item.
It is.
Thank you.
Further questions or comments? Seeing none, is there a motion to approve the resolution related to our 990 and charitable organization report?
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Kayla, any further discussion? Kayla, would you call the roll?
Member Baker.
Aye.
Member Campbell.
Aye.
Member Carlson.
Aye.
Vice Chair Norton.
Aye.
Member Rybeck. Member Tyne.
Aye.
Chair Wheelock.
Aye.
Member Williams.
Aye.
The motion carries.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Craig. Our next agenda item is entitled Metrics. As you know, we tried to highlight one of our key metric areas at each of our meetings. And this meeting, we're actually going to learn more about improving the downtown experience and the metrics related to that. I'm going to ask Patrick, who is joined by Jamie, to tee this up for us and properly introduce Jamie.
Thank you, Chair Wheelock, members of the board. Appreciate the opportunity. I'm here with Jamie Rothy, who leads our work around experience. As the chair mentioned, each meeting you have asked us to look at one of the metrics that are driving and directing our work, and to do a bit of a deeper dive to unpack the work around that particular metric. There are 5 metrics that we work towards. Creating a comprehensive strategic plan, which is really our having guiding plans that are publicly supported, using public investment to generate private investment, creating new jobs and generating new tax base, and then ultimately achieving the highest quality patient, companion, visitor, employee, and resident experience. So this experience metric is the one we want to speak about today. And again, we're going to talk about one part of our work associated with experience. And with that, Jamie, I'll ask you to take the lead.
Great, thank you.
Start with this slide.
Sure. Good morning. It's great to be here. So as Patrick mentioned, we take a very close look at experience and measure against that. And one of the ways that we evaluate that is through improving our public spaces. So that's our focus today, and we wanted to take a closer look at the example of Heart of the City. And so we'll walk through that process today. We wanted to remind the board of the process that we use when we develop public spaces. At the top, we start with a project goal. We spend time with our community to develop this through a thorough community engagement process. And then we walk through more data gathering, doing an analysis of that. You might recall many times where we prototyped and tested these ideas to get further review, and then we finally go into final design. After that, of course, construction, public usage, and one step that's often missed in other communities and one that we really spend a lot of time in as well is this post-occupancy analysis. We want to really understand, we had a set of goals in the beginning. Are we meeting those goals, and how do we need to move forward from this point on? And then how can it inform future projects as well throughout our downtown? So the goals of the Heart of the City project were defined again by our community. We spent a lot of time gaining information from the users of this area, potential users, from the landowners, from the business owners in this area to understand what were the improvements that were needed and how did those roll up to our overall goals within the DMC initiative itself and improving the public space. And you'll see these listed in front of you. We wanted to increase safety, accessibility, of course, more public space to be used, the flexibility of the space so more groups could use it, more people could use it in different ways. We wanted to address sustainability in this area, also increase art installations, and overall improve the infrastructure in the area. If you were with us many years ago, you might have been along this process with us. You might recall we had a team of people on the street gathering information and talking to the people in the area. And then we went through an analysis phase. You might recall this and some of the comments about what is that big blue ball in the sky, but that helps us to refine information. And then our first actual DMC annual meeting was held right in Heart of the City. You might recall it was a chilly day in October, but we did a lot of testing and prototyping and then had our meeting afterwards in that space. But it allowed us to test over about 30 days, different configurations, different ways and people used it and activated it to inform our process then moving forward. So the last step of the project was our post-occupancy analysis. That's where we've been. So as a reminder, we hired Gal to come and help do that analysis with us. They came last fall for a few days, and then they came over the summer as well. We wanted them to do a few things. We wanted them to take a look at the goals of the project and then study the human behavior in these areas to help us understand if we've met those goals or not. We had a team of people that spent, I'll go back, a considerable amount of time in that area gathering information. The images in front of you are just examples of the type of data that was gathered. Gal is quite mature in their data gathering, so we use our mobile devices to watch as people move throughout the area. They looked at things of how people are entering areas, how long they were staying in the area, the type of people and their mobility. They looked at the temperature and where peaks were and where people came back to. They also looked at the permeability. What was next to the public space? Was it a hard wall? Was it a parking lot? Was it a restaurant? And where did people gather with those in that space? And so what we want to do today is share with you a few key takeaways from that. If you're interested in a deeper report, I do have the full report that we can share with you at a later date, but wanted to share some key takeaways. One of those key takeaways is that we recognize that people have better experience when adjacent to active private spaces. So the images that you're seeing on the right-hand side, the dots represent where people were staying and spending longer periods of time. Just to orient yourself here, on the right-hand side is the Peace Plaza area, the Galleria. On the left-hand side would be the Gonda building. And so the Peace Plaza runs through that area first as north to south. So they were looking at where were people spending time and how long they were spending time and what were they doing in those areas. So the red areas is where they found people not spending time, so we wanted to understand that. Of course, the blue dots are where people were spending an extra amount of time. And so when you dived a bit deeper into this study, what we found is that most of the areas that were in the red were hard surfaces. They were not permeable. There wasn't an active storefront, maybe a wall or a parking lot. And so we've noticed that these two, where our public space design came in to that hard space, there were not people spending much time in those areas. Another key takeaway is something that we've been paying a lot of attention to over this last year is the users of the area. And we know that daytime users have different needs than our evening and weekend users. So we studied all day long. In the morning as people are traveling and moving through. Lunchtime, again, people are traveling and moving through. But what we've noticed is that in the evening time, we have a different group of people, and this is young families and children, young adults spending a considerable amount of time in these areas, eating, playing, and spending time together. This is a different group than we've seen before, spending time in our downtown. And so that's something that we're paying very close attention to, and it was great to see so many people enjoying it at different times and different types of people. The last highlight I wanted to bring up is well-maintained spaces create exceptional experiences versus neglected spaces become distractors. So when we look at spaces in the beginning of the day where they're set and the chairs are in space or the toys and the activities are put into their containers or ready to be used again, you see people going in and out of the space and having a great time. But when there are things that are left out random, the picture on the bottom left is a chair in the fountain, perhaps, or the toys are left off to the side and not put back into their cabinet for children to play. Sometimes people don't know what to do with it. Should I go grab that chair? Is that something I should use? Is it left over from something, or is it clean? So we know that it becomes a bit of a distraction to the use of the space. The right side is a picture of the pavers and how when they are maintained, it really creates a flexible, usable space. And there are some times that the pavers move, and so by adjusting those and making sure that they're maintained on a regular basis, it creates a more accessible space and people don't question moving in and out of the space. So what do we do with this information? So we are already looking and taking this information and thinking about future programming of the Peace Plaza. Now that we know that people are spending more time in the evening time, we can work with people like the Rochester Downtown Alliance or other people that are activating our space and giving them that information so they're creating events that are connected to the needs of the people in those spaces and the times. We are already using this information when we were thinking about other public realm planning. So as we sit along Discovery Walk, what does it mean and how do those developments along the walk connect to it so that they're as permeable as possible? We're also thinking about the riverfront and the corridor along the Link Rapid Transit as well. This also informs our Grow Downtown Together strategy, which comes out of our task force work, which is thinking about growing and retaining businesses in our downtown. So now that we have a better understanding of who's using it, the spaces, and when, we can share this information with real estate agents and brokers and landowners when they're thinking about recruiting businesses. We have a better sense of what people are using their time for in these spaces, which can inform their business strategies, hours of operation, or other types of services or resources or offerings in their own businesses to meet those needs. And then, of course, it informs our current and future partnerships. So as we think about our partnership with the Rochester Downtown Alliance, the Chateau, or other examples of areas that are using these public spaces, we can share this information, talk about it, and talk about how we can continue to inform the use of that space.
So let me just, so thank you, Jamie, and let's just to recap. We have a goal around improving, enhancing the experience for people in our community and visitors and patients. One of our strategies that is part of the development plan that guides our work is great public spaces, and that's a strategy that we have throughout our downtown is to establish great public spaces in each of our sub-districts. And as we advance that work, we continue to learn. And so the impact of the interaction between the public space and private spaces is critically important. As you saw from the slide, public space next to Victoria's or Old Brick House or Chester's or Papa's Popcorn are much more active than up this part, the space next to a parking ramp. And so as we think about future public spaces, thinking about how those private sector partners really help the integration between those public spaces and the private spaces is so important. Understanding the users is critically important. And now as we're going through a sort of a post-COVID adjustment to how workers are engaging in the downtown, how people are using the downtown, it should inform, again, future public space design and how to activate those spaces during different times of day for different audiences. And then finally, the idea that once you build a public space, you can't just leave it. It has to be maintained, it has to be programmed, it has to be activated, it has to be kept up. And we see that with Heart of the City. So I think we are pleased with the strategy around experience, but we know there's more work to be done, and we will continue to apply that for future projects. And again, as Jamie said, there's a much more complete report available. These are just some of the highlights that we pulled from the report for this discussion. So thank you.
Thank you. Let's open it up for questions and comments. Member Norton.
Thank you. Excuse me. So my first question was, you talked about the young people being down there, which is very exciting. The University of Minnesota is part of our community now and more active in the downtown area. So I wondered, what time of year was this done? Was it done when our university students were present or not?
Sure. So we collected data in the fall, in September, and then again this summer. So our university students were not fully present during that time, but we have had conversations with them as we're doing our planning for the riverfront as well. So we recognize that their information may not have been gathered in this space specifically, but we had similar conversations with them as we're thinking about prototyping and testing riverfront as well. So appreciate that feedback.
Yeah, I think that's an exciting growth opportunity that we have for the downtown. And
Yeah, absolutely.
and so that's great. And I was particularly interested in that red area that you had, that you talked about. And one of the things that caught my attention is in the area between Chester's and First, along the sides. That is also an area that is flat sidewalk, which is the area that I have a lot of conversation with folks who have mobility issues, in that that's an area for mobility, not necessarily for sitting down, and we don't want to block that area because it needs to be free for wheelchairs and walkers and strollers. So as we look at that, I just want to be really mindful that that is the safe space for travel for people who may not want to be on the bumpy surface. You know, so I just wanted to kind of call that out. And then the last of, do you have any information about the time of day and weekend work versus weekdays? Because it's my understanding, and I'm a little frustrated with this, and it's nothing well, maybe it is something you can do something about, that we do have some stores in downtown who are now making a decision to close again on the weekends, in particular Sundays. So it's this constant balance between how do you bring people downtown and encourage them to come down there if the stores aren't open? And the stores aren't open because they're struggling with getting customers, and that's their low day. And so I think that's something just to keep in mind. And there may be some things we can do to encourage them to stay open. I just throw that out there, but I wondered if this data took into account the weekends versus weekdays, and if you saw a difference.
Sure. So the times that we studied were during the weekdays, morning, noon, and evening time. They did not study the weekend in this scenario. We are using this information in a couple different ways. One, out of the task force, we've formed a grow work group, which has a number of different stakeholders that are landowners, brokers, and real estate agents. And we're using this information to help inform them about strategies and making sure they have the most up-to-date information. I think you bring up a really valid point. I think if you look prior to COVID, we had an interesting scenario where many of our businesses downtown were geared towards patients and companions and the daytime employee. So we can now use this information to help inform their business strategies to continue to evolve. And they are paying attention. We have conversations with them on a regular basis, but then pull out our other partners like the Rochester Downtown Alliance and others to making sure that the public space is well maintained. We have programming that is there to continue to attract and create a stickiness factor, and then making sure that those businesses are open and aware that there's people that are down there. But it is a challenging situation as we continue to grow through this.
Jamie, I'm just going to ask if you could send the full report to all of the board members, and I appreciate that we didn't want to get into that level of detail now, but I think this is relevant information for our continued work. The only comment that I would make is I think one of our perpetual challenges here in Minnesota and a northern climate is the year-round activation of the street and connection between public and private spaces. And so I'd encourage you to think about whether you can grab some additional data, you know, during cold weather months as well, that might help us think about the integration and connection between public and private spaces, and a relationship between activation on the street and through buildings, and how do we manage and balance some of those interests to help achieve our goal about an active and vibrant place in the downtown area. So not necessarily that we delve into it right now, but I think as we continue our work in various parts of the geography that we have an interest in and intend to invest in, I think that would be helpful.
Absolutely.
Any other questions or comments? Member Carlson?
Thank you so much, Jamie. Wonderful report. This is really helpful and exciting information. I love the slide on what's next and how thoughtful it is that we're going to be able to apply these learnings to our future projects. From the city perspective, to understand what our best practices are around how our Parks Department and Police Department and the RDA and our businesses can work together to maintain that space and make it welcoming and inclusive is really wonderful to see, and I think will apply to future spaces where we're working together to maintain them. I was wondering, is this something that we will adopt as a practice for our future projects, or is this a one-time thing where we've learned some really good lessons? How are we thinking of tracking over time for this project and for future projects?
I could respond to that, Councilmember Carlson. So absolutely, I think this idea of doing, I think in fact what we learned out of this is we probably can do a better job of pre-project analysis and creating metrics around the goals that we hope to achieve. And so when we're midway through or complete with a project, we have a good baseline against which we're measuring, and we know what we anticipated or set our goals to that we hope to achieve. So it's both, yes, we expect to do post-occupancy analysis, but even more importantly, pre-development analysis so that we have good data to start with and clear agreement around the alignment around the goals that we're hoping to achieve.
That's fantastic. Thank you for that.
Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, I'm going to ask Patrick as we make this transition to Dr. Otley and the EDA chair report. Patrick, while we make that switch, can you just tell us a little bit about the space we're in?
Thank you. And as we're welcoming Dr. Otley, he too could comment on the space that we are in, having been quite involved in the work that we've done and the work that you've done. So we are in 2 Discovery Square, and this is the public amenity space associated with 2 Discovery Square. It was designed to create conference space both for tenants of 1 and 2 Discovery Square, but also for the community. And so this meeting taking place today, coincidentally, because MCC wasn't available for today's meeting, has turned out to be, I think, quite a wonderful venue, and it's been used by a number of other organizations. The Chamber of Commerce, I believe the mosque held its Eid event here in last year, so it's really become a community space, this particular space, and we are in 2 Discovery Square, which will be home to continued growth through the University of Minnesota student space. Steam Coffee is going to be moving to create an even more active food environment here, and then it's going to be home for companies that are offspring of Mayo Clinic and other companies that have an interest in being co-located here in this community. Martinson is the developer, and I want to acknowledge and thank them for working with us both in creating this space but also making the space available today.
Thank you, Patrick, and welcome, Dr. Otley.
Chair Wheelock.
Thank you for being here. We're excited to hear about the work of the EDA, that you're the board president of the EDA, and we welcome you, and I'll turn it over to you for your comments.
Thank you, Chair Wheelock and members of the board. I'd ask you to just take a look at out the window behind you and just see some of the development that didn't exist when DMC wasn't here. And it would be great if we could go up to the roof and look at the 360 view, and you'd see incredible development and opportunity and economic development that's really a manifestation of what our goal has been. So
it so happens you have a badge that would allow us
yes,
to get
yes,
up
we'll head up after.
So take that as a formal invitation should this meeting end early.
Thank you. So Patrick and the team are going to walk us through the proposed set of 2024 projects and programs in greater detail in a moment, but I'd like to share a few thoughts. First, in accordance with our mission, I'm pleased to report that we, along with our city colleagues, are here to present the capital and operating budget that reflects the shared priorities of the DMCC board and the city council, reflected based on discussions and planning that we've had over the past year. First, though, I'd like to share a few thoughts about the budget and project plan and highlight some of the big projects that are coming down the way in the not-too-distant future that are going to have very substantial impacts on our city and our DMC plans. So we all know that in June, Mayo Clinic announced a preliminary introduction to the Bold Forward Unplanned project, and that is a project to grow the influence of Mayo Clinic in a very futuristic way to modernize and transform the care of human health through the integration of clinical care, research, education, and digital adaptations. More details of that are forthcoming, but I will say that this is really the kind of transformational investment that we envisioned as foundational for DMC over the 20-year period. Next, the University of Minnesota Rochester just announced a few weeks ago that they will be presenting a new master campus plan to the University of Minnesota Regents. This is the first such plan since 2014, so a very exciting development. And then next, in early 2025, just around the corner, the Link Rapid Bus Transit will be commencing in terms of actual construction. And that is signaling a major generational investment in our city that will really transform the way our citizens and our visitors integrate and are transported through our city. And then finally, we're right around the corner from our 2025 10-year development plan update, which we're excited to work with you on and provide updates in 2025. So that level of project activity would be astounding on an individual level. Any one of those projects would be incredible in a city this size. Taken together, I think what we're seeing is really a transformational congregation of opportunities that you have set in motion over many years through proactive, thoughtful planning. And it's really going to have a transformational impact on our city and its ability to strengthen and embrace that identity as America's city for health. As I mentioned at the annual DMC meeting, capitalizing on that opportunity requires bold action, but also thoughtful, proactive, purposeful planning. And that's really what the essence of DMC has been about. So as we look to 2024, our intention is to continue to thrive, finishing those projects that you've committed to and embarking on projects that can't wait, but also staying close to these catalytic projects and thinking as a group about how we maintain the trajectory and capitalize on those trajectories that really are the focus for catalytic new DMC investments. So the capital program that you're going to see today, comprised of the projects that you have guided us to and approved. They include riverfront development, district energy, rapid transit, and the like. The capital program will leave this board, fortunately, and the city council with the maximum amount of resources for the next 10 years as we go through these catalytic projects and invest further in our community. One place you will see more investment in the capital plan is in our business recruitment, equitable business development, and downtown growth programs. So those are areas where we're putting additional emphasis. In those areas, we're responding to your recommendations to strategically grow those areas and to have metric-based results so that we can account for the results of our actions and our investments. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Patrick and the team to guide you through the 2024 project plan and budget.
Thank you, Dr. Otley. And I'm going to ask Patrick to lead us through this discussion. We're going to have a number of slides on some of the key priorities. There are about 8 key priority areas. I'd ask the board just to make notes about comments or questions that you have on those slides, and let's come back to those, not at the end of the whole presentation, but at least at the end of that group of slides for any further discussion or questions. So Patrick, I'll turn it over to you.
And
thank you, Dr. Otley.
Thank you, Dr. Otley. I'd like to invite Catherine Malmberg from the DMC team and Cindy Steinhauser, Deputy City Administrator, to join as well. Cindy, would you hand me that slide? Absolutely. So Catherine and Cindy will join in this presentation. Just to remind you, today we are presenting our capital and operating budget and our work plan, and ultimately asking you to take action to advance this budget or some version of the budget, should you so choose. Some key takeaways that we want you to feel and appreciate in this budget is that we have a work plan that advances your priorities around health, sustainability, equity, affordability, and community engagement. These are things that you have called on us to uniquely advance this work. We have a capital program that ensures completion of prior approved projects, so we are moving along projects that you have had in front of you, asking you to consider some new time-sensitive projects, but as Dr. Otley said, really ensure that we have resources for the future as additional information becomes available about new priorities. And as a reminder, we have been working on this budget, not just for a year, but certainly intensely for a year. This budget reflects many years of conversations and work and decisions. But for this calendar year, really kicked off at the joint meeting of DMCC and City Council, DMC EDA, and the County Board, and then several stages along the way, and today we are in front of you. We'll be in front of City Council on Monday for their consideration and action. And I think this is an important point I will make about this, the budget process. There was a lot of, I think, good intentionality built into the enabling legislation that ensured that state resources would be guided by this body, but that the city ultimately, where the money is spent, ultimately also must approve the budget. And so this budget reflects the best thinking from staff, from both the city and ourselves, that reflect an alignment between your objectives here and the city objectives and priorities. We will be in front of City Council on Monday. There are two primary responsibilities that we have. One is to guide $585 million of public investment to ensure the growth of the community and additional private investment. But then there is the work we do to proactively work to attract private investment. And that's the work we do to work with developers to do our business recruitment and so forth. So directing money, stewarding money to ensure growth, but proactively seeking growth. Again, we follow a logic model. I don't need to spend a lot of time on this, but we are at the point in the pyramid where we are making annual commitments. And then one last slide before I turn it over to Catherine and Cindy. Just to give you a reflection on the resources that have been committed to date. So in the first phase of our work, the first 5 years, we committed $98 million for the programs outlined in the slide. And then we were given guidance by this board during our 5-year update to be in a range of about $200 million spread out over these categories. In fact, if you adopt the budget in front of you, along with the prior budgets that you have adopted, we will be at roughly $196 million in the second phase, the second 5-year period. So largely in alignment with the guidance that was provided during the 5-year update. So with that, Catherine, I'll turn it to you to comment on what have we gotten for those resources, those monies, and then what are we proposing in the future.
Great, thank you so much, and good morning, Chair Wheelock and members of the board. I have the great privilege of getting to provide a quick snapshot of what we have accomplished with the investments made to date. So this is divided into the same capital budget categories that you see in the proposed budget going forward. So it's organized that way. So first we have our public realm. We've just heard a lot about the Heart of the City, the completed first investment, but we have 2 more under construction, Discovery Walk that you see outside the doors here, and Soldiers Field. And then 2 more that are entering into the design phase with the Riverfront and St. Mary's. So a lot of great great public realm projects underway. Turning to mobility. So as you're well aware, our mobility strategy is very multimodal. We're looking at how do we create opportunities to improve the pedestrian experience, the biking experience, and the transit experience, as well as making improvements for streets and vehicular travel in vehicles, standard vehicles as well. So we have a number of new bike lanes, the Link Rapid Transit investments, great prototyping in collaboration with the state in terms of autonomous vehicles. Moving on to strategic redevelopment, we're sitting in one of the great biomed tech buildings, as we've discussed earlier in the meeting. There's a focus on housing that's a sort of growing community priority, and DMC has been able to support some workforce housing and affordable housing projects that are really exciting. Mayo Clinic, as you heard from Dr. Otley, making big growth and investments that have led to a total of approximately $1.46 billion of private investment happening in the DMC district as of the end of 2022. So that's where we sit on private development. And then finally, the streets and sewers category, we've increased the capacity of the systems in the DMC district significantly, and there are more projects on the horizon to enable and support the growth of many different modes of needs that we have downtown. And we're going to be looking ahead at this 10-year update in sort of quantifying those numbers more specifically in terms of how much that sewer capacity is increased and things like that. As Patrick mentioned, there are significant upcoming considerations that we are going to be looking at as we, wrap this year's budget and look forward to next year's budget process. And namely, the important thing here is we're seeing that Mayo Clinic is going to continue to release more information about their new big, bold, forward and unbound project. We are coming up at our 10-year moment next year. And so that's a sort of important inflection point as we're required by the state legislation to update the development plan every 5 years. And so this is going to be our midway point. And it's also the halfway point of available DMC funds. So again, just to reiterate, before we turn to this year's budget, I'll pass back to Patrick here.
Yeah, so as I said, what you'll see are advancing prior approved projects, new time-sensitive projects, and also identifying what we think are projects on the horizon that we've heard about and talked about. And this is the slide that we use to accumulate and annotate all of the projects that are being proposed. And so if you will indulge us, we have a slide or two associated with each of the first 8 rows in this chart, and we will take the time to give you visibility into each one of those. Just geographically understand that these projects reach throughout the DMC district, and this is the DMC district, the west end being at Cascade Lake, and then the transit line, and then of course the central business district. So projects are spread throughout the district. But let us walk through each of the rows of projects being proposed and requests for support. So with that, Catherine and Cindy.
Great. So the first one, we'll start with the public realm section of the budget. First project here is the Chateau Theater, which you, I'm sure, are very familiar with. But a quick recap, I will be giving the sort of background of what has been done to date, and then pass it over to Cindy, who will be talking about what's anticipated for 2024 and future years on each of these projects that we're going through. So starting with Chateau, the 2015 purchase was actually one of the first DMC funded capital investments. And in May of 22, the city entered into a 3-year operating agreement with Threshold Arts. So to date, through 2023, about $7.7 million in DMC funds have been spent or budgeted. And this includes that original acquisition cost. And so that brings us to where we are today with the Chateau project. There is an additional request before the board for another $1 million to support the HVAC improvements that are necessary to allow this building to function in a way that supports Threshold Arts programming goals. And I'll hand it to Cindy.
Great, thank you, Catherine, and thank you for having me this morning. As Catherine said, the 2024 budget request is some additional dollars for the HVAC improvements for that facility to continue to be able to turn on the heat next winter, which I think is going to be really important when you talk about operations of the building. As we have been looking at this facility, we understand, are getting some better numbers and understanding what additional capital needs we know will happen and will be needed for this building. And so our conversations are organized around what exactly are those future capital needs. Real rough number, we've identified already about $4 million of additional work that we know the facility needs. But before we do that, we want to better understand and come to consensus on what does the future anticipated use look like, what is the operating business model for this facility before we come back with any consideration of additional dollars being requested by this board and the city council.
The next public realm project is the downtown riverfront pre-development. Again, this is something that the board has seen before. These are two city-owned sites right downtown on the water, sort of a gateway entrance into the city. It is adjacent to the Link Rapid Transit investments that are being made, right contiguous to the Central Business District. And the current uses are primarily for parking and a limited amount of private space on there as well. And so through 2023, this board has authorized $2 million in DMC funds, and those funds have advanced planning, design, and site acquisition. So now all of the property that you see there is under city ownership. That was purchased from the county. And then additional pre-development infrastructure is still in the works, and you'll be seeing that happening later this year and into 2024. The 2024 request is $1 million for advancing design, but that is subject to the state bonding approval. So I'll pass it to Cindy to elaborate on that.
Yes, thank you, Catherine. So our bonding request is a very significant request. We're asking just shy of $21 million from the state to help advance the vision for redevelopment of this site. A large portion of that request is focused on the west site. That is the site that presents the greatest amount of challenges in terms of readying it for redevelopment. It's also the site that presents the greatest amount of opportunity when we think about creating great public realm and riverfront connectivity, not only of this space, but how this space relates to where we are leveraging other investments, whether it's from Silver Lake all the way down to Soldiers Field, and including investment, for example, in the, at the 6th Street Bridge and waterfront connectivity in front of the Ampey. So again, this ask is predicated on our bonding tour request to the state, and we anticipate coming back to you in November and early next year with additional information as we continue to get feedback from the legislature on that request.
The next item for public realm is the St. Mary's Place Public Realm Design and Construction. Again, this probably looks familiar over the years. There has been some preliminary design frameworks created for this area. What has shifted is that the bus rapid transit line was finalized and design was finalized, and some of those public realm improvements are now captured within the bus rapid transit work in terms of the streetscape improvements and a public plaza next to the St. Mary's station. So the budget request for 2024 is to come back and say, okay, now that we have more certainty around what's happening as part of the bus rapid transit project, what other public realm improvements are necessary in this district to meet the goals of having sort of that dual public realm experience in each of the sub-districts. So I'll turn to you, Cindy.
Great, thank you. So again, the request is for additional design development, design documentation for this station in particular, or this area in particular, this sub-district. It is going to be one of our highest ridership stations. In addition, a 10-minute walk shed of this area revealed thousands of people who live within the area. So understanding what public realm and that public realm that lives beyond the footprint of the BRT project for this area, we think is really critical and in alignment with the goals of the sub-district. So that's what we'll be looking at when we attempt to advance design for this area.
So that concludes the public realm section of the capital budget. Moving on to mobility, and this is the Link Bus Rapid Transit Project, which...
I would offer permission if the board wants to pause. We've done a lot of talking, so if you want to pause that public realm, certainly open.
Let's continue, and then we could have a more holistic conversation about the entire package of key capital items.
Okay. So this is the Link Bus Rapid Transit project. You're quite familiar with. This has been in the works for many years now. And to give you the budget context, this total project cost is $143.4 million, and the DMC funds committed are $56.1 million, and that's the local match to secure the federal funding for the balance. So the 2024 budget request is not a new request. It's just what was expected to be allocated to be spent in 2024 as part of that approved total budget. So I don't know if you have anything to expand on there.
Sure, thank you. One of the things that we've already been talking about is, even though we are still in, we're advancing design and will be going up for bid for this project next year, it's honestly not too soon to start thinking about what does phase 2 look like. And phase 2 does not mean changing of the current alignment and the current route. That is set, that was established through what's known as the ITS study that was done a number of years ago as an integrated traffic study that helped inform this first route, first alignment. But we know that there will be, and we anticipate that there will be a needed expansion, and so start to understand where does phase 2 of this project begin, and we're getting it to the time where we should start to study that, and that's what's contemplated in the future.
So that's the extent of the mobility section of the budget for this year. Moving on to the strategic redevelopment section. So since 2021, our DMC CIP has included this strategic redevelopment fund, and you can see the details in your package in terms of how many dollars were allocated in each of the last 3 years. And what this really does is it allows the DMCC and City Council to respond to DMC funding applications that come up during a year. So it sort of sets a framework, an expected budget for a year. Then each project, as it kind of gets to the right point in its maturity, gets brought forward to this board for individual determination, so that you would see all of these projects again as they come forward. There's a current balance of $10.8 million in that strategic redevelopment fund, and the request this year is for $10 million as well. And the reason for that is because there are several projects that are currently in the pre-development process in the downtown neighborhoods, and some of those are workforce housing projects, and some of them are biomed tech. The potential for shared wet lab infrastructure in the district, and also a potential Discovery Square 3. So all of these are substantial asks individually, and so that's driving the request for a larger amount of funding to be put into this fund this year.
So when we think about this project, we think about it in terms of it's our ability to help invest in the future, whether it's around a product or service or a facility. And so what also informed this request, in addition to what Catherine has said, is a lot of work that we learned through the Downtown Task Force process that DMC helped facilitate among many local partners, in understanding what might be needs in terms of adaptive reuse to bring to more purposeful reuse of buildings and align it with growth opportunities in the downtown DMC district.
So moving on to the last category of the capital projects before we move into operations, and I think we'll take a pause after this category here to have discussion. Streets and sewers. So the first project here is the 6th Street Bridge project. Again, you've seen this in prior meetings. The city was awarded $19.9 million from the federal government to support this 6th Street Bridge project. And again, it's much more than just a bridge for vehicles. It is public realm investment. It is connecting people back to the waterfront. It is supporting multi-modes of transit. To date, $1 million was previously approved for the bridge planning. And the request in 2024 is for $4 million as we move further into design and ultimately construction.
So one thing I want to say is we are so appreciative of this board and the money that was invested that allowed us to submit a very, very competitive application at the federal level and win the first time around for a project. That's unusual. What we do know now that we are well into the design of the project, that we anticipate There are some increased costs. It's due to supply chain. There's some increased engineering design work needed for this project. So it's likely that we will be coming back for some additional match, just over $1 million that may be required to deal with those escalation costs.
The next streets and sewers project is the Downtown District Energy System. So both the DMCC and City Council have adopted energy use and greenhouse gas reduction goals. Kevin Bryk previously presented on how this system helps both the city and the DMCC achieve those reduction goals. And it could serve both public and private buildings in the downtown waterfront subdistrict. And the sort of big change that has occurred over the life so far of this project is the Federal Inflation Reduction Act, because that brought in a whole new source that could be leveraged to support the scope and scale of this project. So the project has been reconceived to be even more deeply sustainable and have sort of a bigger potential reach to allow more private customers to be able to link into the system. The system would be contiguous to a lot of the downtown redevelopment riverfront sites that we highlighted earlier. And so the sort of availability for private development to link into the system is fairly substantial. So in 2024, the city will be pursuing this IRA funding to support and enhance the district energy system for its own buildings. And what we are putting before you here today is a proposed enhancement that would be the platform for a scalable private system to be able to link into that district energy. So the enhancement of that platform cost is approximately $2.2 million, and the cost to provide for more private connections to the district energy system is another $5 million for a total request of $7.2 million. And this, I should also note, private properties that are interested in connecting to the district energy system may also request support in the future, but our research so far has also shown that they should be eligible for some federal funds as well. So that continued leveraging of DMC funds to be able to access federal funding is what's anticipated for this project. The next streets and sewers project is the sanitary sewer capacity bypass. This has been on the list for a while. It's on the schedule, so I don't have too much to say on this. $50,000 was previously approved for design, and now we're ready to move into construction. So that's the $1.5 million request. That's a 50-50 share with the city. Anything to add on that one, Cindy?
No, other than to say we're excited to get this project going, and I would just to Catherine's statement earlier, we are continuing to evaluate additional capacity needs in the district just to understand and be ready for that growth that can occur. There's lots of growth that can occur along just the Link Rapid Transit, for example, and so understanding what we might be coming forward to in the future is what we're currently evaluating.
And then you've heard us reference a couple of times so far, but this is the formal budget line item for the 10-year DMC development plan update. As I mentioned, Minnesota law requires an update to the DMC development plan every 5 years at a minimum. And so the plan was adopted in 2015. The first update was approved in 2020. And so in 2024, we will be coordinating the production of the next 5-year update. In the first 5 years, the feeling of the board was, we were still very fresh. A lot of the information in the original development plan was still, very relevant, and it sort of mapped out the first couple of years. Now that we are moving towards this sort of halfway point, a lot of what was in the original development plan didn't sort of extend is explicitly that far out in the future, because we need to adapt and change and adjust to what has happened in the first 10 years of the development plan. And you've been hearing about some of those initiatives already in this meeting. So the idea is that this plan would address and sort of take the best real-time information that we have coming out of UMR's plan, coming out of Mayo's plans, coming out of all the work the city is doing in various areas, and really integrate those and reproject forward for the second half of the DMC initiative. And so the budget request for 2024 is for $750,000. Anything to add?
No, other than I think it's really exciting. I think there's alignment as Dr. Ockley was speaking earlier. I'm reminded about how much has changed in just the last couple of years, and thinking about how we are readying, and through plans are such an important tool to ready us for an environment that not only uplifts what we have here for existing businesses and residents, but for new businesses and residents yet to come.
So, thank you. I think we're prepared to now pause at the sort of capital portion of the CIP and respond to any questions or.
So let's open it up for questions or comments, and then we'll come back and talk about the operating part of the 2024 budget. Do we have any members? Member Norton and then Member Williams.
Sorry.
I'm happy to defer since I seem to be the one with the questions today. So, Chair.
I'll let you kick it off.
All right. I'm in trouble already. All right. As we, and part of it is the slide that's up here too. So it's what we've already talked about and where we're going. One of the topics is the second bullet down there that has been an issue, and Patrick and I have had talks about this as well as the staff, is dealing with sidewalks and pedestrian infrastructure. Before Chair Carlson was elected, I'd worked with the past chair and the DMC director at the time, that was not Patrick, about making certain that sidewalks, which is one of the main pieces of infrastructure that visitors and staff and residents are exposed to every day, is updated. And I think it's reasonable to say that the cities, while they may have had that on their radar 10 years ago, the DMC funds and the DMC initiative, fabulous for our city, has caused us to change focus a little bit and support all these projects that have been in front of us, and we support every one of them, so it's not a complaint, but just to point out that our sidewalks in downtown are deteriorating to a significant amount, and some of you who walk around will see it. I'm a little embarrassed by some of the patchwork that I've seen recently to address some of that deteroration. That I hope we can get that back on the DMC's radar moving ahead. I do think it's something, it is infrastructure without a doubt. And so I wanted to throw that out there. Patrick knew I was going to, we had discussed it ahead of time. I do have two questions on future. One is Heart of the City Part 2, whether that'll be part of our future discussions. So I'm not sure where that stands. And also a little, just to kind of put it out there, there was, and I think it's a Titan property, but along Broadway where the old Michael's was kind of started and has stalled out. And where is that as we're looking ahead? Because those are, one's a bit of an eyesore, frankly. But Heart of the City too, I know there were some technical issues that had come up, and is that even still part of the future?
Yeah, I can comment on that. So two questions. Heart of the City Phase 2, there's really two versions of Phase 2 that have been talked about. One is the section between the Gonda building and what was Phase 1, so from Gonda to the east, between Kaler and so forth. Some challenges around how to pursue that given the ownership structure and the nature of a street that's been vacated. The other Phase 2 that's been talked about is from Broadway to the front door of Mayo Civic Center. So the portion of First Avenue that would connect Mayo Civic Center to the downtown core. So I think both of those are certainly, we're certainly open to conversations about how to best proceed with either one of those. And I think that they are both part of this whole goal of connecting through public space all parts of our downtown. So I think absolutely they have not been forgotten. They're not necessarily ripe for pursuing at this moment. With respect to the Michael site, privately owned site, we have been in conversations with the property owner around potential future development, and so that's an ongoing conversation that isn't necessarily ready for any particular direction or decision.
Thank you. Thank you. Member Williams.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a couple of points. We've got all kinds of notes here. One, a really good list, and from my perspective, transit, riverfront, Discovery Walk, a number of projects remain kind of top of the priority list, which I think is appropriate. Just on the one, I'm glad to see the $10 million request for the Strategic Redevelopment Fund. Obviously, as a proponent of affordable housing, that seems to be the one area where we are able to tackle that, and it sounds like there's some projects that are kind of in the pipeline. I didn't see a lot of mention of housing throughout the plan, actually, and so I just want to make sure, I'm just making a comment more than anything, that remains kind of top of mind for us. And as I've listened to the discussion about kind of downtown viability, retail establishments, housing density, market rate, affordable across the board is one of the key ways to help businesses thrive in downtown here, along Discovery Walk. And so that's more a comment. My second point is a question, actually, which is kind of a geeky question just around the bonding request. Again, I love the riverfront redevelopment. Is that state bonding request a top priority for city, for county? Just trying to get a sense of, I know a lot of times there's a lot of things that cities will go for bonding for, and where does this sit in that priority order?
Sure, thank you for the question. It is a top bonding priority. The city submitted 3 bonding requests. One of them involved a park and ride, and that we were able to receive funding through a different source, so it bumped up our riverfront redevelopment bonding request along with the airport bonding request. So those are the city council's 2 top bonding requests. And I would say and I know it was just a comment, but your comment about affordable housing is not lost on us. The riverfront redevelopment site, particularly the east site, which is the most developable ready, does contemplate a significant number of housing units on that site, and we anticipate going out for RFP or RFQ early next year.
Great, thank you.
Other comments? Member Tyne.
I like the idea of activating the riverfront. I'm just not sure that the river is ready to be activated. So I think we need to search out how we're going to make that section of the Zumbro River something that attracts people. Right now, it's shallow. You could walk across it without getting your knees wet. It's dirty. And I realize that the city is going for an extension of the sales tax to do more for flood control, which will continue to help with water quality. And the county has spending $5 million on soil health programs to help in the watershed. But we're not there yet. We need to figure out how to make that river more attractive, and that's probably going to be working with the DNR and improving that river. If we don't improve that river, we could do everything around it, but nobody's going to want to spend any time on the river. So I just want to throw that out there. I think we're putting the cart before the horse.
Thank you. Member Campbell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Commissioner, for your thoughts. It's exactly where my head is. In my early life, I was involved in a major riverfront development in Omaha, Nebraska, and we opened up the downtown city to the Missouri River. And in the spring, there'd be trees floating down as the river was flooding. And in the fall, it's sort of like the Zumbro. There were times you could literally walk across. Then I moved to Edina and bought a house on Minnehaha Creek. And 38 years of living on Minnehaha Creek, it would flood, and then in dry periods, it would dry up, and it would be the only unpaved alley in Edina. And so Mother Nature, really is in control of what happens here. And every time I look at the Zumbro River, I have exactly the same feelings that Mark has, that the design here is really critical, and the watershed management to make this attractive as a destination for the people in this city is really important. I mean, I know there was discussion of possibly removing the Silver Lake Dam, and I don't know where that is, so I don't expect answers today, but in the future, I think we really need to know a lot more about what this is and how it's going to be managed for us to spend this kind of money. I think it's a great project. I think it needs to be done, but there's some substantive issues that must be addressed. The only other comment I'd make is that, we continue to invest in the Chateau Theater, which is one of my favorite places in Rochester, having spent my teenage years in the balcony there. But the real question, and then I see we're going to even spend more money down the road. And my real question is, do we have a programmatic plan to utilize it as a destination for the citizens of Rochester and visitors that come here. And since I don't live here, I'm not sure that, how it's used programmatically today, but I think we really need to have a plan of how it potentially can be used in the future if we're going to continue to invest this kind of money.
Member Carlson.
Oh, those are some big topics to respond to. I'm not sure where to start. I keep adding to my list of things to talk about. So there is the Chateau, which right now, in order to activate it in a way that we as council have currently prioritized with threshold hearts, we do really need that HVAC system updated and replaced. So I fully support that investment, but I do think there are conversations to be had with this board and the council about where we're really headed with that building and what sort of investment is realistic, depending on where we want to go. So I think those are important conversations to come for sure. But right now we do need to invest in that HVAC system. I can't let it go by, and Commissioner Tyne mentioned briefly the extension of our local sales tax. Of course, that has an important implication for water quality and flood control work and improving our river corridor. But Member Williams, really critical money in that local sales tax extension around economic vitality, including housing. And that work is just critical to increase our housing and respond to not only current needs, but future needs related to increased staffing for Unbound and other projects in downtown and across our community. So really supporting getting information out so people know to come out and vote for the local sales tax and be informed on those topics. We also, of course, are working so closely with DMC in the city and Mayo and our other partners through our Coalition for Housing. So it's really a team effort in our community and in acknowledging where there are opportunities. So just wanted to make sure that it's very, very relevant to our conversations at the city and DMC, even if it's not clearly articulated in our capital improvement budget. That's all I have.
Other questions or comments? I'll just add a couple of them as well, and it's really more reinforcement, and it's fun to actually go last, so I can just echo and support some of my colleagues on the board with their comments. The Chateau Theater, I think, is such a critical element, and it's had a long history. It's had substantial resources already invested in the Chateau, and it appears that you have a really strong operating partner right now, or energetic, effective, reliable, dependable, whatever adjectives. But I think it would be really interesting for us to hear more about their experience and what they would suggest the Chateau Theater can be versus what we've told them we want it to be. They're the ones that are booking the space, operating the space, managing this space on a day-to-day basis. And I think this is a critical element about the heart of the city and how can we increase the activation and really the public benefit that will result from continued public investment. And obviously, our expectation is that would long-term be a public asset for the community, given the scale of the resources that continue to be invested in it. On the riverfront, it is and has been a priority for the Destination Medical Center. The challenge isn't, is it a priority? The challenge is, what is it? And I've talked a little bit to Patrick that perhaps even as soon as the November meeting, we should really delve into that in a more intentional way to better understand what the vision is, and certainly at least understand what it is that's being requested of the state and the articulation of the development that will be shared both with the governor for his consideration in the governor's proposed capital budget and the legislature when they convene. I would say, given the level of interest that the Destination Medical Center has had in that project, it is fair to assume that we will continue to want to be supportive financially, but I would ask that no one state a commitment on our behalf until the board has had a chance to act on that themselves. So when I see that there's a local funding requirement, it's just prudent to probably put that out there in advance of a discussion about what's the source of the local funding and what should be expected from DMC. And then perhaps finally, I'll just echo the Chair or Member Williams' comments about housing. Retail follows traffic, and our desire to activate 7 days a week, morning, afternoon, and evenings, the downtown space, having a stronger residential component to the use of the downtown space 24/7 is really critical. And I think a mix of affordable workforce and market rate housing, it's always surprised me that this has not already developed more than it has in Rochester, which is a downtown with such great amenities, and they're only becoming more distinct and marketable. So I think at some point in the not too distant future, we'd really like to better understand where the market opportunities are for residential development in and around the downtown area. And then just finally, I want to thank the staff, the EDA board, the city, who have members of the city staff and elected officials who are participated in development of this capital plan. We are very much interested in better understanding what is going to be moving forward with the Mayo development. And so there is a bit of an element of keeping our powder dry as we learn more about the timing and substance of that investment strategy by Mayo. But clearly, these are the foundational projects that will keep not just that project moving forward, but continue to make Rochester an attractive place for future businesses and residential development opportunities in the community. So it's a very strong capital proposal. I certainly hope that it is viewed that way on Monday night as well. I have no reason to expect it will be anything but that. But I want to thank the staff and all those that put this together and are advancing the work on these important projects. I think maybe finally, though, I will ask if there are projects that were brought forward that were not recommended that you think we should state as part of the public record or potentially have any reaction to. So I'll ask Patrick that question.
Yeah, thank you. So we, during our budget development process, we had conversations with the city around a strategy for a remote parking structure. So a parking ramp that would be used for commuter parking outside the district, north of the downtown by about a mile. This is a park and ride, I think Cindy referred to it a moment ago, a park and ride that would serve commuters, but also serve users of the facilities at 125 Live in the rec center and so forth. In the end, DMC EDA really believes that that would require a change in the district, of the DMC district, and really felt like before there would be any change in the DMC district or consideration of that project, it really should be in a more full discussion around potentially phase 2 of the BRT and also the 10-year update that we're doing before there would be any sort of active consideration of a change in the DMC district. So that's a project that we did not bring forward to this board, and we've shared that with city staff, and the city is aware of that as well.
Thank you, Patrick. I think this is an example of local projects that have merit and have strategic import that don't necessarily have the same strategic alignment with our geography and our strategic priorities. So it doesn't suggest it's not an important local investment, but I appreciate and would reinforce that until we think more about phase 2 of BRT and are reflective about any decision to move outside of our DMC geography, I think it was the right feedback, and I appreciate the recommendation. I see that Member Carlson has a question or a comment as well.
Yes, I had one more quick comment, and this has all been really well said and certainly ties into our 10-year planning, which I think is incredibly exciting that we get to be part of. And I just wanted to quickly say that we have learned so much about how to best engage our community and voices that have not been represented in previous planning discussions. We just have wonderful new models around co-design, and just hearing from voices that really can help inform the future of our work and make sure that it benefits the residents who call Rochester home. So it's an exciting time to be part of this 10-year planning, and I look forward to not only integrating the plans and thinking about future of transit, but really hearing how our community voice is represented. That's all I got.
Thank you. Patrick, why don't we move on to the overview of the operating budget?
Thank you. So if I could invite colleagues Mike Flynn, Jamie Rothy, and Wafa Khalifa to join. Cindy, if you would be willing to stay as well. Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you, Catherine.
Appreciate the discussion around capital, and before you decide to take action on it, I will reflect back my notes of what I heard, and so there is assurance that we are hearing you. But before we do that, we want to present the other portion of our budget request, which is our operating budget. There are 4 elements to our operating budget. There is the expenses associated with the Destination Medical Center Corporation. There is the so that's managed by Kayla Brennan, who can comment on that. There is the DMC EDA operating budget, the City of Rochester administrative costs, so there is a small amount of budget that supports the city administration. And then, but more importantly, the city project, not that you're not important, Cindy, but the project management staff at the city that is supported by this operating budget as well. There is statutory guidelines, so we are under a responsibility as outlined in the state law to provide these services: development, marketing, planning, and promotion, development services, and outreach and communications. Those are baked into the enabling legislation and is expectation of the Destination Medical Center in the DMC law. We do this work through what we call the lenses: the lens of health, the lens of sustainability, equity, affordability, and community engagement. And we believe we've gotten this guidance from you in how we should be shaping our work and how our work is unique and special as we deliver on this DMC promise. What I'd like to avail ourselves to is within our work plan, there's lots of detail, and I'm prepared to respond to any questions you have about any of the detail in our budget. But there are 3 areas of our work plan that I want to give, or prepared to give visibility to, because these are places in our budget that are significant increases in our work, not necessarily increase in our total budget, because we've reduced some of our budget in other areas as we ramp up and provide additional services around business recruitment, led by Mike Flynn, downtown growth, led by Jamie Rothy, and the work that we have around equitable development, led by Wafa Khalifa. And so I guess what I'd like to offer to you and the board is, if you would like, we can walk through what those program growth looks like, so that you understand and can comment on the work that we're proposing.
Patrick, I would appreciate that, and I think we have reserved time to be able to do that. So
we'll start with our business recruitment work. As you know, Mike Flynn has been with us for 2 years, spent much of the first year getting grounded in the Rochester reality in this marketplace, and has developed, is that working? Developed now, I think, a pretty robust approach to how we would approach business recruitment and business development. So I'll leave it to you, Mike.
Thank you. Appreciate the opportunity and the time this morning. So what I have here is an outline of what we look to do in 2024 and how that is different and expanded from 2023. And I want to start by setting some context. You've seen this before, but I think it's important. So about a year ago, we conducted a very comprehensive awareness and perception study, really focused on trying to identify the level of understanding of Rochester as a place to do business, primarily among high-growth life science companies, which are our target market, and then a community of what we refer to as influencers, which are people who help guide the investment decisions of those companies. So think real estate, accounting, incentives, industry associations, groups like that. And what we learned out of that exercise was, although awareness of Mayo Clinic was very high and very positive, awareness of Rochester as a business destination and awareness of Destination Medical Center as an organization that could help facilitate investment was very low. And what we learned was we're never going to get somebody to consider this market unless that individual making that investment decision is aware of this market. The next question we wanted to answer was, of our target customers, which are, again, high-growth life science companies looking to make an investment, how many of those were out in the market at any given time looking for places to place employment or investment? And what we discovered was it was substantial. 82% of what I would consider our key customers in a given window are out shopping for places to make an investment. And of that 82%, only 7% in that process considered Rochester as a place to make that investment. So we talk a lot internally about this consideration gap, which is massive. 3/4 of our customers aren't aware of this building or of this ecosystem. And so in setting the programming for 2023 and looking forward, it really is focused in the short term around how do we move the needle on our target customers' understanding of this market. Again, just to sort of reiterate that, we talked to these influencer communities and we talked to life science executives and asked them, why didn't you consider Rochester when you were making an investment? And the number one answer far and away from both groups was, well, I just wasn't aware of the opportunity there. I wasn't aware of the real estate or the potential partnerships or collaborations. Other things that came out of that research was some things that were not surprising. Obviously, they need a talent pipeline. If you're going to stand up an operation and hire people, you want to be comfortable that the people are going to be there to work. They need turnkey real estate. They are ultimately buying the ecosystem, so they need to be able to see and experience and understand the capital community, the service provider community, education, all of those different components. So as we took this information and built our strategic plan around investment recruitment, it really is focused around sort of 3 buckets. The first is this area of build awareness. We are never going to accomplish the things we collectively want to accomplish if we can't move the needle on people's understanding of this market. Second is we need to build the ecosystem so that when we get companies to come look, when we achieve that awareness goal, they can come here and see a thriving ecosystem that have all the component parts functioning and operating. And the third is we need to build infrastructure. We need to continue to make investments in facilities like Discovery Square. We need to identify other infrastructure assets. We talked earlier about Discovery Labs, things that make this market compete bigger, help us compete against markets that from a population standpoint have a lot more people, and things that make this market less risky and make getting a business up and running faster. So we focus on those 3 areas. I built this chart, and it's a little modern art, so I apologize, but what I'm trying to sort of illustrate here is our focus in these 3 areas is going to shift over time. So the left hand of this slide is really meant to sort of highlight the fact that right now we are spending a lot of time on awareness building, but it's because it's the thing that's going to take the longest, and it's also the thing that once we start to achieve it, it's like getting a flywheel spinning. It's going to, success will beget success. So we are spending a disproportionate amount of our time and budget right now on this exercise. Concurrently, we are spending less time on the ecosystem piece of it because we don't have, frankly, as many of those assets in place right now, and we don't have enough hours in the day to do both. So we're spending a lot of time on awareness, and we are starting to ramp up our focus on the ecosystem. These infrastructure projects are sort of represented by these dots. These are things that are going to take place periodically as we work on the awareness building, as we talk to our ecosystem. What are the things they need? And we talk about Discovery Labs right now, this shared lab infrastructure. That is absolutely an item that through our exercise, we have heard from industry this market needs. We need a place where we can come and try to start a business and grow a business and see if we have something and either succeed and move into a bigger space or fail and move on to the next thing. So these infrastructure projects, we have one right now. I could foresee a world a few years from now where we come back to this group and we have an infrastructure project related to workforce development or some other topic that pops up as a need of the industry. We will continue to come back and make requests for those types of activities. So in 2023, our program of work very heavily focused on awareness building, and sort of by definition, that work does not take place in Rochester. So we spend a lot of time out on the road trying to get in front of these industries, and this is just an example of where we have been in 2023, trying to reach our target customers who are at the right point in time for making an investment decision. These tend to be focused a lot around industry events, big gatherings where we can go to one place and get in front of 100 or 1,000 or 10,000 potential customers. We measure industry exposures. How many times are we putting our mark, our DMC mark, out in front of industry? How many opportunities do we have to get one-on-one time with these people that influence these decisions? We do a lot of direct lead generation, so picking up the phone and calling industry and saying, you know, if you have an investment opportunity, we might have a location for you. How many of those campaigns do we run, and how many individual leads are we putting into a pipeline? And then a goal of ultimately starting to bring people here. You know, nothing sells a market better than getting somebody to come and visit, but we have to achieve a certain amount of awareness before we can have success in that. So in 2023, we did not do any of that activity. We did spend time on ecosystem and infrastructure. We've talked about shared lab from the infrastructure perspective. We are starting the process of trying to convene and engage the local ecosystem here. Chris Shad, who I work closely with, has a much longer tenure in this community than I have, and so he has started the process of pulling those groups together, listening to what they need, and starting to develop that plan. So based on what we've done in 2023, based on what we learned through our research, we've put a program together for 2024 that continues to scale this awareness building effort. So everything we did in 2023, the question was, how do we double that activity in 2024? How do we continue to add verticals to our focus area? We look to the clinic and Mayo Clinic Business Development specifically to try to understand where they see growth occurring, and then we try to line up our efforts behind that. Trying to scale our focus on this influencer community, adding in the capital side and the design and engineering side, so people that are funding these ventures and people that are designing facilities for these different industries, how do we get in front of those people? We want to start to bring people into this market, even if it's just once a year or twice a year. How do we get these key customers and bring them here, show them Discovery Square and show them Mayo and show them the city and all the wonderful things that exist here? We want to add more lead generation capability. We need to add staff to do that. We need more people that can get out on the road. We need to improve process so that as we identify opportunity, we can dump that into a pipeline and manage it effectively. And we need to start to build out our marketing program. Right now, a lot of our work is very labor intensive. It's getting on a plane and going in front of somebody. We want to sort of build what I refer to as the always on portion of our marketing effort. So how do we improve our web presence, and how do we improve sales collateral, and how do we get all of those other assets created and out there so that if somebody has a question and we're not in front of them, they can get it answered. So building out that part of the program. Goals for next year, we want to scale up all of these different activities, so double the amount of exposures, double the amount of leads that we're putting into the pipeline. This chart sort of helps point to the difference between where we were at in 2023, what we're shooting for in 2024, and the relevant requisite increase. And then the bottom chart represents the money we spent in 2023 in these areas and what we're asking for in 2024. So you can see for the increase in spending, we look to dramatically increase our level of activity. You can't read this, but this is a calendar. Anything that's black, white, or yellow is essentially a moment in time where we're going to be out in front of industry. So you can see it's about half of the year we're going to be on the road taking this message of Rochester and DMC and getting it out into the community. Our ecosystem program for 2024, we want to start to build some strategy around that. And so there's a lot of what I would call sort of preparatory work. We need to begin the process of defining what we mean by ecosystem. A lot of people talk about biotech or life sciences, but we need to collectively get really clear about what we're talking about when we use those terms. So define our industry, define our geography. Is this a city, a county, an MSA? Is this a broader medical alley definition? How do we get some clarity around that? How do we start to engage those groups to understand what they need from us? Is it capital, or is it workforce development? Is it more shared lab? Is there some other impediment that local industry has discovered that is keeping them from growing here? And how as DMC can we help solve that? We want to start to program against that. So once we figure out what our ecosystem looks like and what their needs are, how do we start to build programming to solve some of those problems? We anticipate, based on sort of anecdotal information, it's going to be a lot around workforce. How do we build a pipeline of talent for cell therapy or for radio pharma or for some of these other high growth industries? We think it's going to be around service providers. You know, how does a market our size build a base of support so that companies feel comfortable moving here and that the companies that are here feel able to grow? And that sort of hits in a lot of different areas. And capital is probably also going to be a need we need to focus on. When it comes to ecosystem, this mapping project, we sort of identify different buckets of partners, and we have to figure out what do we have in this market, what are we missing, and how do we fill those gaps. And then the infrastructure program of work is really around the shared lab concept. Our first sort of conversation with industry pointed to this as a need, which is why we've come forward at this point in time with the Discovery Labs concept. Once we get that, hopefully once we get that sort of approved and built, we'll let that run for a year or two, and then we'll identify what is the next big infrastructure project and develop a plan around that. So I apologize, I got through that fairly quickly, but happy to expand on any of it or answer questions. Yes?
Questions, comments? Member Campbell?
Go ahead, Doug.
Thank you. So, Michael, I think the investment in your group is a very wise thing, because without a sales team, you know, we're going to have an awareness problem for a long time. I think your focus is right. The one area I'd be interested in discussing more is workforce. So, as a person who looked to expand businesses frequently, workforce was the #1 criteria for us before we'd move in. It wasn't tax, it wasn't buildings, it was workforce. And so where are we on that, and what's going on there? I mean, how do we stack up there?
Sure. I would point to my colleague Chris, who is leading a lot of those conversations. So we are looking to partner with industry to identify what are the workforce needs. So specific gaps from when it comes to a position standpoint, and then trying to identify partners that can help us build programming around that. So an example is cell therapy business is a high growth area for us here in Rochester, and we're working with the International Society of Cell Therapy to try and figure out what are the best practices when it comes to workforce development in that industry. There's typically 3 parts of programming. There's facility programming, so where does the training happen? There's the curriculum of what are they actually learning. And then there's always a conversation about how do you fill those pipelines to make sure you have enough bodies going through that process. And so I would answer to you right now, it is definitely an issue we've heard from industry in this market relevant to their ability to grow. So we know it's going to be one of those things that has to be solved. We are just at the front end of the process of figuring out how do we go about solving that? How do we partner with universities and RCT to figure out, you know, it's a very complex problem. How do we bring all of the different partners to bear? And then how do we do that in the different industries that we're focused on? So cell therapy is one of a handful of industries we know we have to solve for. So I don't know if we have a good answer to what we're going to do relative from a programming standpoint to answer that question, but I think we do know it's a question. I think there are a lot of different strategies that could be deployed. I think some of it is fairly uncomplicated. You know, in talking to some of the tenants of that building next door who have mentioned workforce problems, and we asked them, well, are you connected to the local universities? You know, you need an electrical engineer, a chemical engineer. Who are you talking to in higher ed? Well, they don't know anybody in higher ed. And so part of this workforce development program could be as simple as building a pipeline of local industry to local university. You know, it's not going to involve developing a curriculum or finding students. It's just going to be creating communication channels for things that already exist. So I don't have a great answer right now in terms of how we're going to solve that, but we do know it's an issue, and I think there's a lot of strategies we can deploy. Part of our ecosystem programming in '24 is to figure out what is the best way to go about that.
Yeah, I would just say this is long. You know, these are hard things to turn on and turn quickly. So getting on it early is going to be pretty important. You're going to need buildings, but you're going to need people for the buildings.
Yep.
And honestly, the people part is harder than the building part. And I agree with this build it and they will come idea, because this business is sold out in a lot of the key markets where it's historically been based. But this people issue is going to be, frankly, the issue that's going to make it successful or not.
We agree 100%.
Member Campbell?
You know, in that regard, I've had a conversation with interim president Jeff Ettinger, who's coming next week here, with Lori Carroll from the University of Minnesota, Rochester. And, the thought was initially the conversation around Mayo Clinic's support of scholarships here in Rochester, but more importantly, to open up the Carlson School, the College of Engineering, the entire capability of the university here in Rochester. And Jeff, having spent all the years in Austin, knows southeastern Minnesota extremely well. And so I'm hoping that these conversations that are going to be held in the next couple of weeks are really critical. I had a breakfast meeting yesterday with the University of Minnesota Foundation, and they're very interested in the outcome of these meetings that are going to be held here in regard to the issues that you raised, Doug. And it's not just the University of Minnesota. I mean, it's Winona and it's RTCC, and you got to bring all these entities together in some kind of a strategic plan to build a workforce. The other comment I wanted to make is, I thought your research and your awareness is that, the door opener is the Mayo Clinic. It's not the DMC. And you can get an appointment if you're the Mayo Clinic. You probably can't get an appointment if you're the DMC. So I hope that you have the kind of working relationship with the people that are inside of the Mayo Clinic that can help get the appointment and then produce real leverage in those calls that you make. The Mayo Clinic is a huge, very complex organization. It must be very difficult for you to sort of figure out where those competitive assets are from within the Mayo Clinic. So I hope that somehow you can penetrate the Mayo Clinic to be able to take the right resources with you when you make these calls to really make a competitive pitch to have people to come here. And I'm not sure how you do that. I know in some instances, I think the DMC actually pays for people that, do we pay for somebody in the city of Rochester? I mean, I think we pay for some people that are lodged somewhere else and other entities. And my only question is, I'd be willing to pay for somebody inside the Mayo Clinic if they could access the right people to make you competitive, get the calls, and then make the pitch and ultimately make the sale.
So I would say we do have excellent working relationships. It is challenging there. We talk about front doors. There are a lot of front doors into the clinic, and trying to figure out what the appropriate one is based on the technology and the stage of the company, and trying to get those goals and objectives aligned is what we spend a lot of our time on. I think it works very well. I think the closer connection we have, it benefits everything we're trying to do, and it is a big organization, and there's a lot of our job that's spent just trying to figure out how we navigate that. But our challenge is not getting a meeting or getting somebody to answer the phone. The fact that we're DMC and we're affiliated with the clinic, that opens a lot of doors. But once we get that
right.
Sort of fish on the line, how do we direct it appropriately?
Right.
It is a thing we spend a lot of time working on.
Member Norton.
Well, I appreciate both Doug and Jim's comments, and I would say two things. One, when I became mayor, the issue that has just been pointed out about when businesses or countries come to this community and want to work with Mayo Clinic, one of my first questions of Dr. Ferrugia in the meeting we had is, who is it? What is the front door, and who do I get these people to talk to? And of course, everyone wants to talk to Mayo Clinic, and so there is this delicate balance between how do you open the door for some and who are the right people to open the door for is a delicate one. And so I think Chris was the person they directed me to at some point. And maybe now that we have Michael on board, that'll help. But I think you pointed out a real plus for DMC, which is the relationship with Mayo Clinic, but how do we capitalize on that when we're contacted or when we make the contact. And that's the other point I wanted to point out. It's not always us going and finding people. People do come to us. Sometimes they're legitimate and sometimes they're maybe a little more fly-by-night, and we need to have people help discern the difference between the two because it's often hard to tell. But I think one of the points, and I've asked Patrick about this, is when I'm approached and I'm doing some international travel with a couple different countries in the next month, I need materials to take for businesses who may or may not be interested in coming. But if I'm to sell my community and DMC and the growth here, I need materials and I need them interpreted in other languages. So I would just say that's something that's very imminent for me in the next 4 weeks, having that material, one for an energy and environmental conference and the other really focused on business, would be super helpful. And lastly, I just wanted to comment on the idea of workforce. I mean, we know Minnesota has some of the, and Rochester has some of the most highly educated per capita folks in the country, which is nice. But I would say we need to capitalize on our University of Minnesota, who is providing those healthcare focused, which is not all we need, right? But working with them, they're not quite at 1,000 students, but I think that's a focus that we should be working on, is growing that. They want to grow and we want to help them grow. So I think there's some synergy there. And also, we have a lot of really bright people in this community who have children who don't stay in this community. And so we lose talent regularly, and it's a chicken and egg scenario where the kids leave because we don't have the business opportunity that they might want that would be exciting and innovative, and the businesses aren't ready to come here because we don't have the workforce. So I think that's just another challenge that we're going to have to really focus on in the coming years. So, thanks.
Member Williams.
Just, I know we've talked a lot about workforce. I agree with a lot of the really good points that have been made. I will say, up in the cities where we are involved in workforce development, we will have to build our pipeline of workers from within. Even if we do, the demographers tell us, even if we do the best job we can of keeping our young Gen Zers, even if we do a great job of importing workers, we will still have to build our pipeline from within. And so I would suggest actually that, I know you all are thinking about this, the connection between our equity and engagement work and underutilized talent here in the region, and not just in Rochester, but throughout Southeast Minnesota, is absolutely key to that longer term. I agree with Doug. It is a long timeline to really build that over time. But part of the answer lies in our underutilized workforce.
I think that's an excellent transition, and Patrick, why
Yes,
don't we
thank
move
you.
on to that discussion?
Thank you. Appreciate the discussion. And just for the record, Member Campbell, we don't have to pay Mayo to have staff. We have Mayo paying us to have staff. So we have 3 staff members supported by Mayo Clinic who are assigned to Destination Medical Center. So Chris Shad, who you've been introduced to in the past, and now Jamie Rothy, who will make some comments. So, in fact, this alignment and this connection is absolutely critical and essential, and thank you for raising that point. So I've asked Jamie Rothy to lead this discussion, which really draws on, it's sort of the parallel between the work that Mike is doing and Chris are doing to go out and tell the story about Rochester and the opportunities nationally and internationally. There is homegrown work that we're doing to grow the attractiveness and vitality of the downtown. And over the past year, as you know, and it's true of a lot of communities, there was a lot of noise and conversation around who's doing what with respect to the downtown in this sort of post-COVID environment and the disruption that people experienced and felt. Jamie led a process along with community partners and community stakeholders and businesses to really sort out all of that noise and make sense of it, and to help understand what is needed for our downtown, one, and secondly, who could be doing and who could provide leadership on those things. And out of that work, it became clear that there is work that other organizations are best equipped to do and have the competencies and the capabilities around that will help support the downtown and the challenges that it is facing. One area that we felt that we could take the lead on, along with a partner in Rochester Area Economic Development, is the Grow Downtown initiative. And this is the effort to work to grow the downtown. And I'll let Jamie talk about our approach with that.
Patrick. As Patrick mentioned, and as you may recall from our last meeting, we've provided updates too regarding the Downtown Rochester Task Force, a group that we convened of the partners up on the screen to have a discussion of what Patrick just mentioned about the conversation of the future of downtown and how do we work together. We shared that report with this group, and it was a collectively created community-based action plan. We convened a number of different engagement opportunities with the community. We synthesized that information and found 4 major themes in which we wanted to work around and some direction from our community stakeholders. And we were given direction by both of our boards to, again, focus on the growing downtown area. So we took that information and we began to build strategies around that with information that we already had and information gathered from this initiative within the task force. And that has informed now a new strategy where we are focused on strengthening our demand drivers of our downtown, and they're listed in front of you. Many of the items which have been talked about today. So we see these demand drivers as Mayo Clinic, as we've heard of the Bold Forward Unbound initiative. And we look at these in 2 ways. Not only how can we position Rochester downtown the best for this growth, but how can it benefit the most from this growth as well? So how does Mayo Clinic get the best experience and the best growth possible by investing in downtown? And then how does our downtown and the stakeholders get the best out of that investment as well? University of Minnesota, of course, and their planning efforts and their master planning growth, we're positioning ourselves to help them with those conversations, but also looking about how can they get the most out of their experience in our downtown. Housing is another topic as well, and those strategies. We're also looking at this through the lens of our cultural anchors, what the reasons why people come downtown to visit the Civic Center for a show or a conference or a theater experience. And then the last bucket is catalytic retail. It's those spaces where people cannot get those experiences anywhere else, and we want to build those in our downtown core as well. We've already started working on these strategies since some of the information came out of our task force and organizing ourselves. I mentioned in my earlier presentation that we've built some work groups around this, bringing people together to start looking at how do we, knowing that, for example, University of Minnesota is already positioning and having conversations about future planning. We wanted to get involved right away. We didn't want to wait. And then also with the other spaces. So the list in front of you is just a group of strategies and tactics that we're already beginning to understand what information do we have, what information are we missing, and how do we build a team around this so that we can start to position ourselves for future growth. We do this in a way where we're really focused on one desired outcome with this strategy is creating a space where we are attracting people downtown and that all of the organizations that we're partnering with are doing the same thing. And so you'll find more information in the work plan about this work moving forward.
So just to put a pin in it, it's really our work we see is around the efforts to attract the attractors, to attract the demand drivers that ultimately will create for a more vibrant and vital downtown. And so that's a very a proactive and concerted effort that really is intended, again, to ultimately grow the demand that will result in more retail, result in more restaurants, result in more other entertainment in the downtown.
Proceed.
The last area that we want to talk about is the role we're doing around equitable economic development. And this work was first supported by the grant from the McKnight Foundation through their Vibrant and Equitable Communities. And it's work that we began about 18 months ago under the leadership of Wafa al-Khalifa. We want to continue that work, and we're intentional about continuing that, and we're still working with McKnight about potential additional support going forward. But in the meantime, we are building this into our budget and into our work plan, knowing how important it is to this board and how important it is to the community. And so I'd like Wafa to just walk through a bit of that work plan.
Thank you, Patrick, and good morning, board members. Thank you for the opportunity so I could share with you some of the work that we're doing in equitable economic development. If I were to put the equitable economic development into 3 buckets, it would be capacity building, relationship building, and identifying partnership, collaboration. And the third bucket would be equitable transformation of policy procedures in order to create more diverse, equitable, and inclusive community. And in this slide here that I always like to add to my presentations, which is from our partner, City of Rochester, of who lives in the community. And maybe this would answer or kind of reflect on the point Board Member Paul Williams just made about workforce. In equitable economic development, it's our way to look within and to see who lives in our community, how can we utilize the relationships that we have in order to increase workforce. So just noting here, 18.7% of our community speak other language. Over 12% of our residents have a disability. So all these are opportunities where organizations and community organizations and businesses can make changes within their work in order to make their workplace more inclusive. And one of the areas where we're building capacity is through targeted workforce. We are utilizing relationship building by connecting with regional partners like Greater Minnesota Housing Fund, where we will be hosting next week in this space on Thursday, October 5th, the first Emerging Developer Expo. They have an awesome program, and we thought, why not introduce it to our community here? How can we build a cohort of emerging developers in our community and to utilize the regional resources provided by like Greater Minnesota Housing Fund or ULI, Urban Land Institute, where they provide an awesome training and build this built environment workforce here in Rochester in order to cater to the big plans like the Bold Forward Unbound initiative by Mayo Clinic. We're continuing our collaboration and partnership with under Mayor Kim Norton's leadership, the Bloomberg Philanthropies Mayor's Challenge, Equity in the Built Environment, and we're continuously supporting the project by providing relationship connections and how can we increase the workforce, specifically BIPOC women in the built environment. And we're continuously meeting with right now 10 BIPOC or emerging developers from the region on monthly basis to share with them the development opportunities that we have in Rochester and let them know and aware in order to grow developers here in Rochester. And through also capacity building and relationship building in the community, we're continuing our efforts with partnering with the Coalition for Rochester Area Housing by identifying creative ways on how can we increase housing, how can we utilize the resources that we have in terms of funding resources to prioritize housing, seeing some conversations that we're having with different development opportunities. How can we utilize existing office spaces, hotels, just like how we've seen UMR done for the DoubleTree and utilized the hotel to turn it to student housing. I think we do have great opportunities of finding creative solutions to increase housing and meet the demand that we have in our community. And one of the areas that I've mentioned earlier, which is the partnership and collaboration, City of Rochester and DMC have established the Equity Alliance. And the Equity Alliance is a space where we can connect on growing and building capacity in the community by growing community co-design, transforming policy procedures, and create opportunities to learn best practices in diversity, equity, inclusion topics. One of the programs through the Equity Alliance that we established is a monthly equity series. It's a webinar that's available also on our YouTube where we're sharing some really awesome topics to educate our community, but also for other organizations to join the Equity Alliance. It is really important to take a look within, and it's important to assess ourselves, go through diversity, equity, inclusion assessment, understand how equitable our work was in order to make better changes and tangible changes in the future. And yeah, continuing our efforts in equitable engagement, and like I've mentioned with community co-design, so far we have trained 44 community leaders from City of Rochester project managers, from Chamber of Commerce, from Ready, from all the organizations that you could think of, and nonprofits, where they took on a 5-hour leadership training. And I believe our mayor is taking it in October, the October cohort, along with Council President Bryk Carlson too. We're so excited. So we are encouraging more leaders to take this training and to learn more about how they could identify the appropriate projects for co-design. And we're also hosting a graduation this Tuesday, October 3rd, in City Hall. We're graduating the second cohort of community co-design facilitators. So we'll have a total of 14 community co-design facilitators in our community. They took on a 25 hours training provided by us in order to grow and build capacity. And it's so great to see some of these facilitators taking on some projects and facilitating co-design. We also featured last May in the Real Estate Summit 3 BIPOC-led nonprofit organization projects in our community. And this is our way in equitable economic development on how can we create more diverse attractors to our downtown. How can we bring more BIPOC communities in the community by maybe offering support to the Rochester Downtown Mosque Project or the Pamoja Women's Shelter or CMRC and their hopes to create an intercultural center. And where we're heading, this is some of the work that we want to continue, is to continue to grow capacity in the community, continue to foster and cultivate all these relationships, and find true, real solutions for housing in order to increase affordable housing and home ownership in our community. That's it. If you have any questions, thank you.
Thank you so much. Questions, comments? Member Norton?
My day to talk, I guess. I would just say the city also has been investing in something that aligns really nicely. We have been working with the National League of Cities on some BIPOC entrepreneurship, inclusive entrepreneurship projects with 3 of our area nonprofits, Collider, which works with entrepreneurs, Ready, and Cradle to Career. And so we have been able to get them small scholarships, and the mayor's office has supplemented those scholarships with a small amount. And we are seeing the outcomes of those all within the next few weeks, where we've held a Collider event last night or night before last. There will be a Cradle to Career Educational Summit where they will release their findings about a culturally responsive childcare, which is really important link to getting people working. And also Ready's project, which there's going to be a large event held, and it's meant to encourage entrepreneurs in the space in our downtown and our whole community, but it's linked very nicely with the work that Desich Medical Center and Wafa has been doing. So it's really nice to see that synergy happening in our community. So I just thought I'd mention that.
Member Williams?
Madam Chair, I'll follow the mayor again. And one, I do want to give the mayor and the city and others kudos for the Bloomberg work, the equity in the built environment project, which is very exciting. Earlier this year, I had the chance to spend an afternoon. WAFA guided me through a series of community just conversations with different diverse communities, and it was tremendous. And so 2 things I took away. One, DMC is absolutely engaged in this work, and I believe the city is engaged in this work. And secondly, communities are eager. Diverse communities are eager to get into the game, to get into the work, to join us, to partner with us, and to take advantage of opportunities. And so again, it's always the mechanism of how do we kind of combine that in the right ways and find the right opportunities. So I just applaud everyone for kind of continuing to work at this.
Well, I appreciate highlighting these important operational investments, and they're all built into the 2024 operating budget that's being proposed. I think we're actually ready to consider approval of the proposed budgets.
Just before, as you're doing that, so in the budget is the support, Member Campbell referenced support for city project managers, so that is also in the budget in your materials. Cindy Steinhauser, Deputy City Administrator, leads the team at the city supported by this, and so she stands ready to respond to any questions. And then the Destination Medical Center Corporation budget, which is managed by Kayla Brennan, is also in your materials and in this action that you'll be taking. So just wanted to be sure that should there be any questions that of either of them, they stand ready to respond.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate too, a subset of the board members participated in a couple of the planning sessions over I was going to say the summer, but I guess in August more specifically. And so some of us have delved a little bit more deeply into this. I should ask, do any of the members have any questions about any of the materials or any of the aspects of the operating budget that they would like to raise before we take action on both the capital and the operating? And might I ask Kayla just to do an overview for us of the resolutions that are in our packet for approval and to just summarize what the resolutions permit?
Certainly, Madam Chair, board members, in your packet is proposed Resolution C, which covers 3 broad categories of approval. The first is approving year 1, so 2024, of a 5-year capital improvement plan. The second general category is for the operating budget and work plan for the EDA, the operating budget for the DMCC, the city administrative costs as have been discussed, and the project management staff at the city. And the third general category of approvals within this resolution is the extension of the current working capital loan arrangement involving the city, the DMCC, and the EDA. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Are there any questions? Seeing none, I would take a motion for approval of the aforementioned resolution.
Move approval.
Is there a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'd ask Kayla to call the roll.
Member Baker.
Aye.
Member Campbell.
Aye.
Member Carlson.
Aye.
Vice Chair Norton.
Aye.
Member Rybeck. Member Tyne.
Aye.
Chair Wheelock.
Aye.
Member Williams.
Aye.
The motion passes.
Thank you. And again, really good work. We're very excited about the prospects for 2024 and the progress on these key goals. And we appreciate all of the time that staff has spent to prepare and then present today for us. The next item on the agenda is the status reports. I think what we'll do is see if anyone has any particular questions. Our hope is we might have time to run up to the top level of this building and take a quick 360, but if there are questions on any of the status reports, now is the time to raise them. Then seeing none, I would say that we, just a reminder, our next meeting is on November 17th, and we will be back at the Mayor's Civic Center. And now I would take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second. Let's get a roll call.
Member Baker.
Aye.
Member Campbell.
Aye.
Member Carlson.
Aye.
Vice Chair Norton.
Aye.
Member Rybeck. Member Tyne.
Aye.
Chair Wheelock.
Aye.
Member Williams.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Fabulous. Thank you, everyone, and we'll see you in November.